to acknowledge that some very important, all of you are my friends, new friends, and it's great to see some of my old friends, but there's a couple of people here whose name I want to just call in honor of their presence. One is Senator Mike Gravel, whom I will be with in Boston on the 13th. And of course, Michelle Chasudovsky. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to spend a good amount of time with him, and he invited me to participate in the event in Montreal. Also, Splitting the Sky, the most courageous man in Canada, for sure. Stand up, Splitting the Sky, John Boncourt. And there's going to be another action, I understand, against George W. Bush, who comes to Canada quite often to collect six-figure speaking fees that your organizations heap upon him. And, you know, war criminals should not be welcome in Canada. And then there's Mahdi Darius Nazimroya, who's sitting in the background, but who needs to stand up, because this young man I know he's so shy, but he better stop being shy, because what he did took an awful lot of courage. Now, I went to Libya at the beginning of the crisis, and he was there at the very end of the crisis. And Libya is a part and parcel of the continuum that was started with September 11th. Now, one of the ideas, I'm going to be very brief in my remarks, but one of the ideas that was put forward last night in Montreal is that 911 was a coup. So I want to start there. It was a coup in the United States. And as a member of Congress, after it happened, I had a lot of people who came to me with what they considered to be inside information. And there was one, actually there were several gentlemen, African-American gentlemen who were with the military, who suggested that the planning had begun a decade earlier, and that they might have been a part of that planning. Now, I don't know about that, because, you know, I didn't have really the opportunity to check out everybody who came, even those who seemed to be a little more cogent in their representations to the congressional staff, and then ultimately to me. But I put that there because there might have been something to that. And then the other thing that I think is vitally important is to understand the context of what was happening in the United States and what was happening in the world at that time. And that's why I believe the theft of the 2000 presidential election was so important. Because if there indeed was planning before, then there had to be staging. And you had to have the right individuals in place for this to actually be carried out. And that's not to say that had Al Gore and Joe Lieberman occupied the number 1 and number 2 slots in the U.S. government, that this would not have happened, that the very same personalities would not have been there, because it is clear that those who seek to wreak terror inside the United States as well as outside of the United States have managed to penetrate both the Democratic and Republican parties. But the theft of the presidential election was important, and that's how then we ended up with Bush, Cheney, Powell, Pearl, Rumsfeld, and Wolfowitz, and all of the cast of characters that you know very well. It is also my belief in conducting really the only, how can I say, well, the first, if not the only, congressional investigation into the theft of the presidential election, that the Democrats at the highest levels of the Democratic Party colluded with the Republicans to prevent any real substantive investigation, one, that during the process of the recount that would have changed the outcome, and two, after the fact, that would have denied legitimacy to the illegitimate president, George W. Bush. So we can't absolve the Democrats of anything because they were part and parcel of the problem. Now, one of the other things that happened that I think was important at that time was after the theft of the presidential election, and then at that time, which is chronicled by Greg Palast in various books and articles that he wrote, I worked with him to try and get as deeply as I could into the mechanism of theft. And it seemed that we were really the only ones who, despite 535 members of Congress, whose political livelihoods would have depended on the integrity of the 2000 election, but it seemed that there were not very many people who were interested in election integrity. But anyway, so we are conducting these investigations into exactly what happened in Florida. Now, of course, the same thing as a result of the refusal of the Green Party in the United States, as small and underfunded as it is, to investigate what happened in 2004, now we have a lawsuit that's been filed to look into the mechanism of theft in Ohio of 2004, just as an aside. But what also was very important that was happening on the international stage at that time, I served on the International Relations Committee, both the International Relations Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. And at that time, there was the Durban World Conference Against Racism, which that entire process was extremely important to people who think like me, because there is a global community of people who have legitimate grievances against their political systems, and they do not have a mechanism to have those grievances addressed. And that includes inside the United States. So Durban was very, very important to me. It was also important that, to me, that the Congressional Black Caucus be represented at Durban. We did some things there. I was the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus Task Force on Durban. There in Durban, I was very pleased to have presented to Mary Robinson, who at the time was the High Commissioner for Human Rights, a paper that outlined the murders unsolved of members of the Black Panther Party who had been illegally targeted by the United States government. And there are some 24 of these individuals who were active in U.S. politics who wanted the United States to rise to a higher level, to acknowledge, respect, and respond to the legitimate hopes and aspirations of people who had been shipped over to the New World against their will and who had been denied their rights and human dignity in the course of pursuit of those rights up to the present time. That was very important to me. Durban was a success because at Durban, all of the world's aggrieved peoples were able to come together in dignity and in respect and place our agenda on the international stage. And it was less than a week when I returned from Durban that September 11th occurred and the entire conversation changed. Now, what happened on September 11th from the standpoint of somebody who was in Washington, D.C.? Probably the thing that struck me the most was after September 11th, there were slick brochures, magazines with photographs that appeared on the newsstands immediately after September 11th. And I asked myself, how did they get those pictures? Kind of like all of those red, black, and green flags that showed up overnight in Libya. We also, as members of Congress, were given talking points, and you all have seen my interviews that I've done talking about these talking points. But to go back to, I will describe the talking points in the language that was used by Fred Hampton, Black Panther Party member, chairman of the Chicago chapter. And what he used to say before he was killed in the counterintelligence program was that he was sick and tired of receiving answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain, and conclusions that don't conclude. That is the way I would characterize those talking points. The talking points basically said that the United States was hit because we're free. But now I think I have given you a little bit of my background. And what I understood clearly was that we ain't free. And so therefore, that talking point was created for another population, but certainly not the 635,000, approximately 635,000 people that I represented, and the millions across the United States who looked to me for leadership. So I want to fast forward because you have that information. And what I will say, I'm not going to take 10 minutes. And what I will say is that there were certain members of Congress. You know that the United States Congress has done veritably nothing on the issue of 911. And how could that possibly be? There are 5 members of Congress, now former members of Congress, whose names I want to call, and I will start with Earl Hilliard. Earl Hilliard was the first Black member of Congress elected since Reconstruction from the state of Alabama. Earl Hilliard did something that no Black member of Congress is supposed to do. He thought he was a full member of Congress. He served on the House International Relations Committee with me, and he dared to do something that was not permitted. He traveled to Libya to establish relations with the people and the government of Libya. He was slapped back in a cruel kind of way, and he was not reelected in 2002. This is all connected. James Traficant, you might know that name. James Traficant was one of the few, these people that I'm naming had they been in the Congress, they would have at least tackled what happened on September 11th in a very serious kind of way. James Traficant had the misfortune of representing a guy by the name of Jim Demjanjuk. And I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but he was accused, this gentleman was accused of being a guard at a concentration camp. He went to his member of Congress, who was James Traficant, and James Traficant defended him. Case went all the way to Israel. He was found not guilty, and now I think he's like 91 years old, and he's still being targeted, but now he doesn't have Jim Traficant because Jim Traficant was kicked out of the Congress as well. You all know my story, and there's another gentleman by the name of Bob Ney who learned a little bit too late that certain lobbyists you shouldn't associate with, and he got caught up in the Abramoff scandal, and he's not in the Congress either. And then there's Kurt Weldon, who actually talked about Abel Danger. And Kurt and I served on the House Armed Services Committee together. And so when Kurt stumbled on Abel Danger, then I reached out to Kurt, Republican from Pennsylvania, and decided that we would work together. Kurt, in the election, just prior to his re-election, his home and the home of his daughter was raided by the FBI. That's not exactly the kind of environment that will foster people to vote for you. And so Kurt also ended up not winning his bid for re-election. The 2004 election, I decided to run for Congress again. 2005, you all are aware of the 8-hour congressional briefing on 911, which to date is the only serious briefing that was held on Capitol Hill on this subject. No one has touched it since. The reason that I didn't believe the talking points and the severe orchestration that took place and sort of a induction into groupthink that 535 members of Congress were supposed to buy into was because, one, I understood as an African American what it means to be targeted by the United States government through the documentation provided to all of the people of the world now, because it's on the internet, in the COINTELPRO papers, the counterintelligence program. COINTELPRO papers is a book written by Ward Churchill. I also was very well aware of what the United States government would do to communities of color, because there was no such thing as crack cocaine until the United States decided that they wanted to impact policy in Latin America and they needed to finance it. Operation Northwoods, I called in James Bamford to explain to me Operation Northwoods. And there in my government's own writing, is a most diabolical plan, eerily similar to what happened on September 11th. So, therefore, I think that when I filed those articles of impeachment against George W. Bush, he was highly deserving. Bush, Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice. And sadly, as a result of the census and the reapportionment process, many people went to Dennis Kucinich, who declined, although he had the chairmanship for a brief time and the ranking member leadership on the House Government Affairs Investigations subcommittee that could have done some additional work, did not do it. But now, because of the census and reapportionment and redistricting and the fact that he comes from the state of Ohio, he's been targeted for elimination from the Congress. And so those voices that have been the voices that we, people who think like us, rely on to tell the truth are not there. And something has to be done in order for us to retake that most important site of policymaking, the Congress. It's supposed to be the people's voice, but right now it is not. So with that, I will say thank you for inviting me to present. Thank you.
Thank you, audience. Thank you, Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. We have a few moments for questions from panelists, should you have any, but very, very few moments. Yes, okay. Professor Lee?
Thank you, Ms. McKinney, for your excellent comments. Could you say a few more words about what happened in the only serious congressional hearing on 9/11, and is there any documents that we can have access to?
Oh, you know, that's been a deficiency of mine. It's like, yes, there are documents. We had Peter Dale Scott. We had national security whistleblowers. The questioners were Wayne Madsen and Mike Rupert. We had former CIA people. We had the Jersey Girls. We had everybody who was anybody who had done any kind of research into what happened. And we had the panel of experts like you guys that made the questions. And basically, I think the documentation, I have to go to the congressional staffer who put it together and see if we can put them up on the internet, because we do have them.
Okay. We could follow up on that.
Okay, great. I need help. Thank you. I'm too busy doing other stuff.
Professor, just a moment, Congresswoman, if you wouldn't mind, can we take another question? Professor Johnson?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. Very interesting and touching presentation. We are on this panel with the help of James Gorley going to produce a report. That report will summarize the findings of these hearings. I wonder if you'd give us some advice on how we might best use that report to reach the political part of the political spectrum that might be sympathetic to what we're doing.
Well, I think Senator Gravel will. Have you given your remarks yet? Sunday. Okay. When Senator Gravel talks, I think he will be able to answer that question on the U.S. side. But I think that the actions of splitting the sky are the kinds of thing that needs to happen here in Canada, because you have a law on the books that allows for citizen arrest. And with the proper documentation, which of course I think with the panel of experts that will be panels of experts that will be presenting here, that provides the kind of evidential foundation to bolster the kinds of actions that Splitting the Sky will take. And maybe if things work out, maybe I can be here too in October.
Well, maybe can we take one more question? Congressman, you can stay for a few more minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you think that the September 11 event happened in order to justify the Iraq War, which was decided on 2000, and what role the American press played before the war against the Iraq? You speak about the Iraq War has been decided in 2000. It seems to me that you have told. So the war, the 11 September event could be agevolated, come si dice, promoted this just in order to justify.
Yes, there are some people who believe in the pronouncements of their government. And there are some people who believe in what the media tell them. They believe it with every fiber of their being. They believe it. If it's on the television, if it's on the CBC, it's true. If it comes from, you know, your previous prime ministers, it's true. And there are some people who like that in the United States as well. But because I come from the underside of the United States, I am not the person from the shining city on the hill. I am from the person whose family is in the slum, who is to service those people in the shining city on a hill. And therefore, I see the United States and the operations of the government and the society, the culture, and the media from a different perspective.
Thank you very much.
That perspective is bolstered by the documentation that is provided on the internet under the counterintelligence program, and then at thekingcenter.org, you can see in 1999, when the trial was held to ascertain the complicity of certain individuals and certain institutions in the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the expert witnesses testified that in 1999, 1/3 of the CIA budget was devoted to buying the media. And the lies and the demonization that took place during the civil rights movement was paid for by the U.S. government. And they knowingly repeated lies. Now in 2003, in a court in Florida, a decision was made that the United States media could knowingly lie to the people with impunity. That is now U.S. law. So the media have taken that to an extreme in Libya. And there was a time when I would tune in to the Canadian media so that I could get the truth, because I knew I wasn't getting it from the U.S. media. But now, why in the world would you guys choose to put yourselves in the hip pocket of the United States so you could be sat on? We all need a movement of the people, so that we can take our countries back from whatever this is that's got it. Thank you.
Thank you.